There we go.
There we go.
All right, perfect.
So Mike, if you would like to try to bring up your, oops, apparently I've started the seminar and didn't know it. Let me hold off here. Okay, that looks good. If you'll close up, then I'll go ahead and open up our opening slides, and I'll let Claire get started here as soon as the room kind of fills up. We're already at 25 people.
Let's see.
You could just say stop share. It should be at either the top or the bottom of the screen when you hold your cursor up there or at the bottom.
I don't see a stop option. Says I'm screen saving.
So are you in Zoom that you're looking at, or are you looking at your desktop?
I'm on my desktop. I could see my presentation in front of me and your pictures on the side, but I don't see where. I can see that I'm sharing, and oh, here we go. Stop share. Okay.
There you go.
Sorry.
All right, so I will open this up, Claire, and we're still got people coming into the room, so we'll let that sit for a second before we actually get you started.
Sounds good. Mike, I'm so glad that you can make it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting me.
And so, Mike, we've got two co-sponsors with us. We've got Tyler Kovacs from the Heritage Conservancy, and we have Diane Smith from the Bucks County Audubon Society.
Great.
They're going to be talking a little bit about their organizations here in a moment once we get started. Still going to give a little bit more time. We're right at 6 o'clock right now, so we can chat for a second to allow people to get into the room. And usually, Claire, I'll give like a minute or so for people to come to the room, and then doing our One Health presentation gives time for people to get in, and then they can hear the sponsors and go from there. When I give you the go ahead here, I'm going to turn off my camera. I'll be here, but I won't come in unless needed. And so, Mike, we've got about an hour with both your presentation and with Q&A. And so if we're approaching, well, once we get through the presentation, Claire, do you want me to ask the questions, or do you want to?
I can ask the questions.
Okay.
Let me just look at the. Okay, so I can see the Q&A and stuff, and I can go through there. Okay.
So I'll just stick around. If we start getting past 7 o'clock, I'm generally pretty respectful of people's time, and if we're telling them it's from 6 to 7. Generally do not like it to go much further than that. If it looks like we're getting past that, I may interject and just say that we need to wrap it up. But
sure.
Mike, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and we've got a group in here now, so I think we're good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my video, and then Claire, it's all yours.
Okay. Just let me know when we're green to go.
You're good to go.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to one of our spring One Health seminars here at Del Val for our One Health seminar series. I am here tonight with a couple of guests. And first, I'm going to introduce Tyler Kovacs from the Heritage Conservancy to sponsor our seminar. Before we go through there, I'm going to go through, I went out of order, didn't I? So let's go to Tyler since we're already on his thing.
All right, thank you, everyone. I am Tyler Kovacs from the Heritage Conservancy, and I am a conservation steward. Heritage Conservancy is a nonprofit based out of Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and we work to protect land and historic places. So since 1958, we helped to preserve about 16,000 acres of open space, farmland, wildlife habitat, and important watersheds throughout Bucks County. On a lot of our preserves that we own, it's about 50 of them. We manage the land to protect our waterways, our natural resources, and improve wildlife habitat. Unfortunately, on all of these preserves that we own, we have some types of invasive species, some more than others, but almost every single preserve we have invasive species on them. So at least once a week, myself and the rest of our stewardship team work to remove these plants from our preserves. We use the help of volunteers and summer interns to conduct this work. And then we also reforest our preserves with native plants, mostly trees and shrubs, to help combat the pressure of these invasive species. We also conduct a lot of other conservation projects on our preserves to help wildlife habitat. Before I pass this off, I also want to advertise that Heritage Conservancy currently has 9 open positions. 5 of them include summer positions that are hands-on positions on land management work. 4 of them will be working with me as interns, and there will be 1 position that will be part of the community engagement team. So each one of us can actually help to improve our environment by learning more about invasive species and controlling invasive species on their own properties. So Heritage Conservancy is really happy to be sponsoring this evening's presentation. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Tyler, and sorry for going out of order, folks. But let's move on to our guest from Bucks County Audubon Society, Diane Smith. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. As you can see on the slide, our mission is primarily education. Everyone from preschoolers through golden agers, we seek to educate them about the natural world with emphasis on conservation, stewardship, including, of course, the protection of birds, wildlife, and habitats. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded as a chapter of the National Audubon Society in 1969, making us, I believe, the 5th chapter in the organization's history. So we continue to focus on history, education, and conservation. We are one of Heritage's properties. We are conserved by Heritage Conservancy, and we too have invasive species on our land. And we require the help of volunteers periodically to help us do what we can in terms of removing them. Over the past year, we've had a very dedicated crew of master watershed stewards and other volunteers doing invasive removal and planting a lot of native plants in our riparian buffer, hopefully to keep the natives in place and the invasives in check. If you could go to the next slide. We have a number of things coming up that might be of interest to the folks here. Coming up very soon is a rain barrel workshop. There's 3 different ways to participate in that. So you can go onto our website and look for that. Our Earth Day Festival is coming up on April 9th. We have a forest therapy walk the morning of May 14th and a spring wildflower walk the afternoon of May 14th. We also do guided bird walks on the 1st and 3rd Saturdays of every month. I get to lead those starting at 8 a.m. So we hope to see you out at our property for any of these activities, or if you just want to take a walk on the grounds, where the grounds are open dawn to dusk, and you're always welcome. Thank you, Claire.
Great, thank you, Diane. Let's do a quick circle back to our slides, maybe, for One Health. You can tell it's my first rodeo. So we at Del Val have a program of One Health where we are trying to break down the silos of all these different disciplines and get people together to understand that everything's connected. Plants, animals, people, economies, everything is connected. And the health of one of those parts affects the other. The well-being of one can affect the other. And so we're pushing for a more interdisciplinary approach to how we're going to handle situations across the world. and understand that if we connect people, if we connect places, we connect governments and healthcare systems, animal healthcare systems, all of those together, we're going to live a lot longer on this planet in harmony together. So as part of that program for Del Val, we are working through all of our students to incorporate a One Health interdisciplinary idea across all curriculum. We start with our Del Val freshmen that come in. There's a two-part freshman seminar where they're introduced to the One Health concept, and they are encouraged to apply it to their entire degree and in their professional life. So we're trying to break down those silos here at Del Val. And part of how we do that is that we have 6 seminars per semester, and we invite prestigious colleagues from across the country, sometimes across the pond, to come visit with us and give our population some really interesting feedback in a lot of their different fields. We have people from all the different disciplines as much as we can, because some people think One Health, oh, it's just medicine, oh, it's just animals, oh, it's just the environment. It's not. There's everything from business to social science and beyond. So tonight, we have here a presentation with Mr. Mike Van Clef from the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space. He is the Stewardship Director of the Invasive Species Strike Team in New Jersey, and he is here to talk to us about how we might battle invasive plants at home and in our businesses. So welcome, Mike. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So if you'd like to share your screen.
All good? Perfect. All right. Well, even before I start, I'll warn you that this presentation could be extremely long, and that's not my intention. My intention is that this is a resource. I'll hit highlights, I'll hit some slides very quickly, and I'd be happy to make the entire presentation available to anyone who wants it. So really quickly, the strike team, our mission is to protect natural lands through coordinated strategic invasive species management. So anyone that's done work on invasive species knows how fruitless it could feel if you don't have a really good strategy in hand. You could whack away forever and there'll still be invasive species. So you have to basically understand how to prioritize your work and bite off pieces that you can chew, then take your next bite. So that's really the key for invasive species management. We do all kinds of things: mapping, data analysis, reporting, outreach, training, and we search for and eradicate, focusing on newly emerging invasive species so that we can keep them from spreading and becoming widespread. We have a lot of staff that looks super impressive, and it is, but we are all part-time. So it's not as much resource there as you think, but we have a lot of good talent there, a lot of hard workers, and we do everything we can. We have a 4-person steering committee that helps us make decisions, and our lists are created by this technical advisory committee that has expertise, a wide-ranging expertise. So we don't just sort of stick our finger out and see which way the wind's blowing. We have experts that tell us what are the species we should be worried about. And you know, the basis of all these things related to invasives is stop and take a breath. Don't just be mad about invasives. Remember why you're doing it. So there's a lot of diversity out there that's worth protecting. And you know, that's the motivation at all times. It's very New Jersey centric, since I'm from New Jersey. But you know, there's similar and more things in Pennsylvania. But yeah, there's lots of different plant species, native plants, 2,000, beautiful. Lots of different, all kinds of animals, including federally listed bog turtles and globally rare northern meadowlark butterflies, etc. Lots of great stuff still out there. Just a real quick and well, I might have a slide for it, but New Jersey is about 50% urban and agriculture and about 50% natural. So that gives you some sense of the split in New Jersey. And the goal, again, is always a positive goal. What do we want? We want healthy forests. And unfortunately, a forest, if you go to a forest, you go hiking in the winter, say, or the beginning of the fall after leaves have just fallen and you can't tell where the trail is because the forest is completely clear in the understory, you are in a very unhealthy forest. You should never have to, you step off the trail, you should be weed whacking, and not through invasive plants that deer don't eat, but with native species. And this is part of the problem, is we don't have these systems and it makes them vulnerable to invasion. So here's some of the graphics. Certainly, Eastern Pennsylvania is undergone very similar trends as the entirety of New Jersey. So as this red expands, the green closes down and the pressure on the remaining green spaces becomes more intense with the greater amount of people. So, right, there's all kinds of things, right? It isn't just invasives. We've, habitat destruction, overabundant deer. I'll emphasize that quite a bit because it's directly tied to invasive species abundance. Invasives, soil modifications from past agriculture leads to forests that are highly susceptible. We've stopped fires. It's not a natural fire regime anymore. So that's altered. Our stream flows are altered. And of course, we have this looming, well, it's not looming, it's here, but ever increasing concerns about climate change and how that's going to affect our natural world, not just us, but the natural world itself. So on invasives, it's important to understand that it's a small percentage of non-native plants that are invasive. So there's been about 10,000 non-native plant introductions. About 1,000 of those are established non-native plants. So they might just be here and there on a roadside or something like that. Not necessarily weeds, but just here. Now there's about 50, almost 50 widespread invasive plants, and that's really bad. One of the things that catches our attention is that there's nearly 100 emerging invasive plants. So as bad as it feels with 50 widespread, what if we had 150 widespread? So clearly that would be much, much worse. So, understanding and focusing on emerging plants before you dig into some of the widespread stuff is always going to be a key strategy to preventing future harm. So invasives, they're by definition, they're not native. They grow densely and exclude other species. In a nutshell, that's it. So you could be non-native and just here and there, just a couple of plants here and there, you're not invasive. It has to be to the point where you grow so densely and are so abundant and your impacts are severe that you cause problems. Not just that they're here, but they're causing problems, and that it results generally with plants because they grow densely and exclude other species. But a very key overriding attribute of invasives is that deer don't eat them. So we have, I'll show some numbers, but that is a key overriding factor. If you go down the list of plants that are considered invasive, very few will be palatable to deer. And in general, they have characteristics of weeds. They can grow in all different kinds of soil types, all different kind of light levels. They mature quickly and make lots of seeds. So those are common attributes of invasive plants. And I think this is sort of an important aspect. We often talk about how bad they are. Why are they bad? I think it's really important for us to be able to communicate these things. So I just have one example. A farm field often will become completely infested with autumn olive, an invasive species. And I chose an invasive that actually has some wildlife values. Many of them have very limited wildlife values. I chose the best, so to speak, invasive that I can come up with. It makes abundant flowers in May, loaded with bees, absolutely loaded with bees. Great pollinator resource in May. In September, October, it makes tons of fruit. eaten by anything from a chickadee to a black bear. So it has a wildlife value in its fruit. It has flowers for pollinators. And there are 2 points in time where it's particularly helpful. One of the attributes of invasives is that there aren't insects that can eat their leaves, and that helps them be invasive. In addition to not being palatable to deer, there's no particular insect that does significant damage to them, so it really gives them an advantage. If a whole field is mostly this is just a tiny subset of the native species that would occupy the same habitat and did occupy that habitat 70 years ago. And you get the gist, right? There's all year round, there's fruit or seeds or flowers throughout the growing season. So you have a broad array of resources across an entire year. So again, if you were a bee and you needed to eat all summer, you'd probably be unhappy if you ran out of food. You were super rich in food in May and then had nothing for June, July, August, September. Similarly, if you're an animal that needs to eat fruit, you're probably disappointed to know that you can only eat once per year. You know, so it really does break the food web, and that's really the heart of why invasive species are of concern to ecologists. It just creates a broken food web. And, you know, there's been really troubling trends over the last 50 years in particular. We've lost 1/3 of birds, individual birds, not by species, but we've lost the population, overall population of birds has dropped by 1/3 in 50 years. That is stunning. And we've had similarly huge decreases in insect populations. And there's obviously a variety of causes, but when you look at this kind of setup, you can start to see how invasive species are plugging into this problem. And similar trends in Pennsylvania as New Jersey. You know, prior to European settlement, there were about 10 deer per square mile. In the early 1900s, there were almost 0 deer. They were over-harvested for commercial purposes, and they were virtually extinct. Lots of conservation efforts through the 1900s. They were back up to around 10 in 1972, and then it took off like a rocket since then. So if you have 100-something deer per square mile, that's 10 times too much, 10 times more than the forest can handle. Even if you're lucky enough to have only 50 deer per square mile, you're still 5 times more than the forest can really handle. So it's no coincidence that the rise in deer over the last 50 years has been hand in hand with the rise of invasive species over the last 50 to 70 years. So if you look at botanical surveys from the 50s, often the only invasive you hear of is Japanese honeysuckle. Literally. You know, there might be little notes about tree of heaven. Multiflora rose through the 50s and 60s was given out by US Department of Agriculture in the millions as seedlings to farmers to make a living fence for livestock. But they hadn't really hit our natural areas until later, you know, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera, up till now. So forests in, you know, 1970 were dramatically healthier than they are now. Many of our very common invasives, stiltgrass and barberry, they weren't problems until the 1980s. So, I mean, sort of think from nature's point of view, nature's time scale, like, okay, 50 to 70 years, that's a good clip of a person's lifetime, right? But that's nothing from nature's point of view. You know, do you think bird and insect populations could adapt to dramatic changes in their food web and their food resources in that short of a time? Obviously not. You know, there's no bug that's evolved to eat autumn olive leaves significantly, you know, and that's just one case in point. But it's important to know that this is, from nature's point of view, a very, very modern problem, and the rate of change is very disturbing. A lot of what we do in stewardship is actually, you know, you want to say, well, you're making it better, and you can, but a lot of times you're just trying to slow down how bad it's getting worse. And that's sort of a harder pill to swallow, but it's more realistic. We are changing the natural world in an exceptionally rapid way. We're degrading it. And yeah, that's generally the motivation for most stewards. So overabundant deer, just some examples. So Hopewell Township is just across the Delaware from you guys. We do deer counts every year, and just getting the gist, there's a lot of them. In the literature, it says 10 deer per square mile, it sort of can break the Lyme disease cycle. So that's one of our problems, thinking about One Health. It's not just forest health by any stretch, it's our personal health. It's deer vehicle collisions, which is also a real health and financial problem. So, and we lose our landscaping plants, farmers suffer. There's a lot of tie-in of deer overpopulation and broader impacts in society. And the general idea is we've given them a salad bowl that's perfect habitat for them. Sometimes people will say, well, we've developed so much, so we've squeezed that same number of deer into a smaller space, so now that's why there's a problem. The reality is there's way more deer than there ever were because we're feeding them so well and also protecting them so well. So, all these forest edges are perfect for deer to eat. All these tan areas are either agricultural or neighborhoods and things like that where there's no hunting pressure, but plenty of food. So we're feeding them extremely well, and there just isn't sufficient deer management. In Hopewell, about 40+% of the land area cannot be hunted or is not hunted by choice at all, no hunting. So if you take a huge percentage of your land mass and say you can't hunt, and then where there is hunting, it's usually not focused on reducing the deer herd size. It's more of a recreational activity, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Hunters are one of the, out of all the people in the population that really care about nature, hunters are a group of people that fit in that category. They're not oblivious to it. They appreciate it and use it. But unless we do something more beyond recreational hunting, we will suffer all of these consequences as we are now. So in a forest setting, what's happening is trees fall down. That happens. It's probably going to happen at an increased rate with climate change and severe weather. At our home base on Baldpate Mountain, where about 250 acres of forest was knocked down by a tornado last summer. So that's unusual. That is not something that typically happens in our neck of the woods. But trees also fall down naturally. Without climate change. And what happens when you have overabundant deer, instead of getting a new tree to fill the gap and make the forest can perpetuate forever, you get a whole slew, a dense cluster of invasive plants that deer don't eat. In this case, wineberry and Japanese stiltgrass. When you look down at these forests, you often see seedlings of native plants. Nature never stops trying, absolutely never, ever stops trying. And the problem in most places is that, yep, this 3-inch seedling is never going to get much bigger than that, because as soon as it gets a little bit taller, the deer notice it and chomp it down. And again, that when we say invasive species are competitive or they're more competitive, I think that's misleading. They're just less yummy. When you pull the deer pressure off, if you put a deer exclosure up, all of a sudden native plants come popping out of the woodwork. And it really isn't that they're less competitive, it's just that they get eaten too much and the invasives don't. So that kind of creates the pattern we're seeing out there. And yeah, there's various things. This is what we want. We want a good, healthy forest. Often we have a completely stripped forest in the understory, or a completely infested forest filled with things that deer don't eat. And that's kind of where we are with deer overabundance absolutely leading the charge of the damage, and invasives following behind, really. So, like I said, we like to think about emerging invasive species. So will we ever get rid of Japanese barberry? Unlikely. But if there's 100 other species that are in the waiting on deck circle, and we could slow down their spread, we should probably think about doing that. So the strike team with our technical committee, we put our emerging invasive species into different stages. So stage 0 means you have less than 10 populations known in the state. Stage 1 would be 10 to 100 populations, you get the idea. But the point of this is understanding quickly how far out of the box a particular new emerging invasive species is to help prioritize our activities. So stage 0 examples, sickle weed, Japanese spirea, and I'll just sort of toot the horn of the strike team on this one. Sickle weed is like the best example I can possibly come up with. Because we exist, where people know we exist in the conservation community, when they make an observation of an odd new plant, they're like, who should I tell? Oh, I should tell the strike team. So out of the blue, a colleague called up and said, I think I identified this as sickle weed. I've never seen it anywhere in New Jersey before. And I said, neither have I. I asked our technical committee, they said, nope, none of us have ever seen this before, but it is a problem in the Midwest. So one population known, no one's ever seen this thing ever before in New Jersey. I went out and I got rid of it. I used herbicide and I eliminated that one population that if it left unchecked, like every other invasive species in the past, it would have become a nuisance across the entire state. So, that's the whole concept of early detection and rapid response, is being there for people to tell you what they see and being able to react to it as quickly as possible. So if someone said, hey, I found a population of Japanese barberry, I'm like, oh, that's sad. There's not much we could do about that. That's really widespread already. If someone says, I found a population of this weird plant that none of us have ever heard before, I'm like, we could do something about that. So, that's sort of the nature of early detection, rapid response. And like I said, this is another example, but I just want to really hit this home because this is the most efficient and effective way to address invasive species. This is a really nice, diverse, wet meadow. One Chinese silvergrass popped up. We know that it could end up being this, completely infested, destroying this beautiful, diverse meadow. What do? The answer is obvious. You kill that one plant. The key, obviously, is being on top of things, knowing what the threats are when they're new. And, that's what our technical advisory committee helps us with. That's what our phone app and people reporting things to us. We know what's new because we never get reports on it. If we start getting more and more reports, we start to say, oh, okay, maybe this is more common than we think. But when something we know is going to be a problem on any particular site, you get rid of it before it becomes a problem. And I'll pass by this one. And I think this is the key, the stewardship effort hierarchy. Number one is you have to address the deer overabundance problem. If you don't, then your native species will not be able to compete on their own. And ultimately, that's what we want. I don't consider myself a gardener of the woods. Nothing wrong with gardening. I'm also a gardener at my house. But the woods, the nature, it really should have as much as possible its ability to sort of perpetuate itself without a lot of interference. Now, I know that's very hard when there's so many human influences. But the most important thing we can do to allow nature to sort of kind of fight for itself, so to speak, is reduce the deer population so that native species that are typically more desired as food for deer actually have the ability to compete against invasives. When you hit the invasives part of your pyramid, you go after the things that are really uncommon in your state first. Get rid of it before they become a problem. and then you focused on the highest conservation value areas. And then typically, you know, it's harder to come by resources to do like outright restoration, but you know, that's great when you have the resources. So we've done a lot of searching and detecting and eradicating over the years. I'm going to pass by this, but we have grants and contracts. That's primarily what funds our work, is grants and contracts. And we do a lot of outreach. One thing I'd like to point out is this concept that we call local strike teams. And basically they're volunteer groups, completely volunteer. They're usually led by 1 or 2 people at the core. And they have, basically the key is having those 1 or 2 really dedicated people plus regular, predictable schedule of work days. When you put those together, you chew away and at things and you have great success. As Jennifer Helmer's inspiring quote is, you keep plugging away, you have success. And these volunteer groups that are out there, that are, you know, they're out there doing their thing and having great successes on their local parks. And we try to help them when we can. If there's, often I'll do a site visit, we'll identify invasives, talk about how to kill them. I'll write up a, you know, a really concise prioritization of what I think the stewardship activity should be based on that pyramid I just showed you. But it is super impressive. These groups are fantastic. You know, some of them put nonprofits to shame with how much they get done on a particular site. They're just a really good set of people that work really hard. I'm going to pass by all of this, but this is a long-term monitoring program that kind of goes to the whole deer and invasive species angle. Again, I'll make this available to people and they can look at it at their leisure, but I will pass by this work at Duke Farms that we've done and documented how reducing the deer increases the natives, basically. But I'll stop at this slide just quickly. This is what I was talking about, how when you remove deer pressure or reduce the deer pressure, native species outcompete invasive. This is all barberry with the little leaves in here. Do you see it dominating? I see it about to get winked out because it's going to get overshaded by oak seedlings, ash seedlings, spice bush seedlings, all native species that are so much more valuable to our fauna. So that's what happens. Native species are very competitive as long as they're not getting eaten to death. So this is fair. I'm going to start generally on this, and I don't know how much more detail I'll go on control efforts because I'd rather leave time at the end for questions. But the most important thing that anyone can do, any homeowner can do, is not buy invasive plants. You know, I know Pennsylvania has a regulated list. I saw a proposal they were going to add 25 more species to it, which is fantastic. You guys are way ahead of us in New Jersey. We're embarrassed because you guys are doing great, but we are very far behind you at this point. But you know, voluntarily, we ask people to not buy invasive species. And again, it's of the thousands of non-native species you can pick from, I think most people, if they're concerned, can stop buying 100 or so of them. You know, the things that are widespread or emerging invasive species. And again, just emphasizing this, the most important control method is reducing the deer population so that native species can compete effectively. But obviously there's biological control agents which require significant amounts of testing, generally 10 to 15 years before they're going to put anything out there that might eat an invasive plant. Probably the best recent example of success is purple loosestrife beetles that have significantly reduced purple loosestrife compared to what it was 20 years ago. Mechanical methods. They're obviously labor intensive. They're not always very effective. Chemical methods, I know a lot of people are concerned about herbicides. We use them judiciously. The safest formulations applied in the safest ways is generally the mantra of stewards. So there's obviously different ways to control invasives. You know, I'm going to skip by all of this sort of stuff, but basically a homeowner could apply herbicides and they're restricted to what they can buy. But like a land trust or conservation group, you know, they should be certified to apply herbicides. You should not be sort of doing it willy-nilly, I guess is my point. So yeah, we have guides here on different methods to use, what the pros and cons are, et cetera, et cetera. For every single invasive species in New Jersey, we have recommendations specific to that species. So again, we're trying to help guide people to sort of doing it in the best way possible. And again, we're guided by our technical advisory committee and the tons of insight we've gotten from colleagues and the general public for years. So we sort of incorporate that into our recommendations. And then we have helpful guides on how much do you mix of this or that to make the method that will kill barberry or whatever species you're trying to get rid of. Okay, so I think I'll probably go, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes tops on and talk about some particular species and then leave time at the end for questions. So Calorie Pear is definitely, it's every single street tree in most small towns. Every town has Calorie Pear, and that has become a really bad invasive. I like to think of it as still emerging in New Jersey, but it's kind of widespread, unfortunately. So this is another great example, though. This is sort of one of the key things that the general public, who's not really just like lives and breathes nature, like, so, ecology geek like me, they would say, well, this is very beautiful. What's wrong with that? Wow, wouldn't it be great if an entire field were filled with that? How beautiful would that be? And it is for a brief point in time, and it provides some resources to pollinators for one brief moment of time. But what it is, poor pollinators do the rest of the year from May through October, when the Calorie Pear has blocked out every other species that would make flowers and fruit during the rest of the year. So again, it's sort of empathizing with nature. The short handle I always put about it, it's not just about us. It isn't just what looks beautiful to our eye. It is what does this species that we know didn't evolve here, what does it do to our ecosystem? And if it has damaging to the ecosystem, in my perspective, beautiful flowers doesn't save it. It's causing damage and hurting lots of other plants and animals, despite looking beautiful to our eyes for a brief point in the spring. Japanese Aurelia is another very widespread species. Thorns everywhere, literally everywhere, underneath the leaves, the stems of the leaves, just absolutely loaded with thorns. And again, it has the ability to take over areas to the exclusion of other species. Now you're invasive. Some newer ones that a lot of times, I'm always going to vote with nature no matter what, but man, this was a tough one to put on the list. I think Japanese maples are one of the most beautiful, almost artistic looking trees out there. And we don't put things on our list to spite anyone, including ourselves. But when we see something spreading in natural areas, we have to put it on our list. So again, despite its beauty, my personal affection for it, it is becoming an invasive species. Norway Maple's been around a little bit longer. Seems to like urban forest a little bit better. Siebel's crabapple, the only invasive crabapple that's out there. Not too often purchased. tree of heaven is probably second to Japanese honeysuckle for being the oldest invasive that's out there. The tree that grew in Brooklyn. Got to admire its toughness. Again, it has the invasive quality of growing densely and excluding other species. Some shrubs that we're very concerned about include common buckthorn. So again, how do we list things? Well, we know that buckthorn is very invasive in the Midwest, in New York, and parts of Pennsylvania. When we started to see it in New Jersey, we're like, yeah, the writing's on the wall. We see this thing as a problem in our neighbors' yards, so we might want to put it on our list. So, you know, we focus when we do find it, we try to eliminate it. Similarly, glossy buckthorn. This one has the ability to completely override wetland areas in particular. And one of the first strike teams out there, the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge team, many years ago, we had a presentation there, and this is how this transfer of knowledge thing works. You know, you create this community. I gave a presentation for them. We did a little walk, and I said, "Oh my goodness, you have glossy buckthorn," and I knew, well, the Great Swamp is a wet place that this might do really well in. And I said, wow, you should really, you know, keep your eyes on this one. And they found many acres of it. Undaunted, they've been working on it for the last 10 years and have done amazing progress getting rid of it. In the interim, because these volunteers who had no experience initially have learned things that they have taught me and that we write into our recommendations on how to get rid of particular species. So that's that really nice full loop that you get when you have communications. This one always makes me think of that sort of full circle, going from training someone who has very limited knowledge to being trained by them. So it's really good stuff. You know, barberry, of course, like since the 80s, it's been a real bad problem. It's also a nice magnet for ticks, research has shown. It harbors more ticks than other vegetation. Jet bead is getting out there more and more. Like I said, you can look at our list and such, and we have ID guides on every single species on our website. But just a quick tour of a couple of things to be concerned about. Linden viburnum, these viburnums are really troubling. Multiflora rose. This one is probably one of the worst ones in New Jersey, Oriental photinia. It's getting worse by the day. Siebold's viburnum, winged burning bush. And I'm going to breeze through the rest because I would like to leave some time for questions. Are there questions in the chat, or should I just kind of keep going?
We do have a couple of questions, and I have some as we've been going.
Okay.
But I mean, let me see. You could take another minute or two to wrap up whatever you wanted to do, and then I can start with the question.
Sounds good. Okay. So climate change, where does that plug in? You know, English ivy has been known to be invasive in other parts, like the Pacific Northwest, for example, where it's warmer. It's been used in New Jersey for probably 150 plus years, but only in the last 20 or so has it really shown itself to be invasive. And it moved from South Jersey, and it's coming like a wave through North Jersey. So you go down the Cape May and you can see forest floors, even through central New Jersey. I did a work in Bordentown, which is also right along the Delaware River. Forest floor coated with English ivy. When I started my career 30 years ago, that was not true. And the fact that it's invasive in other areas and that it's getting worse south to north in New Jersey really starts to suggest climate change being a factor here. And there are many others. So, you know, it's definitely going to increase certain invasive species, or species we didn't even consider to be invasive now becoming invasive because they have a warmer climate and it matches them better. And we talked about honeysuckle. Wisteria similarly seems to be getting turned on by a little bit more warm weather. Mile a minute, that was a frightening one. Bittersweet. These are all, this is sort of an older widespread, again, starting from probably the 80s and 70s and 80s. Porcelain berry absolutely is responding to climate change, it seems to me, based on my experience. Similar winter creeper euonymus. So, you know, some of these things are very popular, but they are absolutely becoming invasive. Shiny silvergrass, I mentioned, extremely popular, becoming invasive. Garlic mustard's been around a little bit longer, but again, that little bit longer only means from the 80s or so. Knotweed is a horrible problem all along the Delaware River. Stiltgrass. This is one that when people ask me, how do you control it? I say you have to lower your deer herd. The only time that stiltgrass is doing really well is when there's no shrub layer above it to cover it. And the shrub layer gets removed by deer, the stiltgrass can go bananas. Mugwort. We have an app. I'll just leave this as a resource, but we have ways for people to report to us. And we also have a website that shows all the collected data that's ever been collected can be accessed by anyone at any time through our website. Definitely happy to do any questions and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been fantastic. I do have quite a few questions here. I'm going to try to go in the order in which they were asked. But if I go out of order, sorry, folks, but I'm going to start here. Tom asks, I have sticker bushes all around my property that are surrounded by woods. Should I leave them alone or get rid of them?
Yeah, it's hard to know what they might be. I assume that he might be referring to multiflora rose, if it's filled with thorns. It really is a matter of, you know, if that truly is multiflora rose that you're describing, because it could also be native blackberries. So I'd have to know exactly what species you might have. Like I said, with any invasives, if you have the ability to do it, please do. You know, it's understandable when things get completely out of hand that an individual homeowner is going to have a really hard time struggling with getting rid of something big. You know, but even just chipping away, create a spot in there and plant a tree and protect it from deer. You know, those are the types of things a homeowner can do at the level of a home to make things better.
Great. Let's see. So the same person asked, are there any advantage to leave them alone? And I think it's the same person. So I guess they're asking about those same possible sticker bushes.
Yeah. I mean, not much that I could think of, especially if you have the ability to replace it with something that has more ecological value. You know, if you cut it down and can't do much about it, it's probably better. But the best case scenarios, especially again at a small scale, and since it is near your home, so you have some, you know, motivation to want things to look nicer and have more birds and butterflies come to your house, ideally you would replace them with native species.
Okay. So next question is it safe to keep invasive species indoors as like houseplants, or would they still likely spread outside?
For the most part, anything that grows outdoors in New Jersey doesn't make a very good house plant because it has to go dormant. That's just part of it. Has to have a life cycle where, you know, goes dormant and comes back. There aren't too many things that you can grow in a house that we would classify as an invasive outdoors. They tend to be more tropical type plants.
Okay, so then to follow up to that particular question, say you don't have a particularly green thumb, you have an invasive plant in your house as a house plant, it dies, you throw it out. Is that potentially a problem wherever it lands?
Not really. I mean, plants, I mean, obviously if it makes seeds and things like that, again, if it can't live outside, If it can live outside, you would have a hard time keeping it alive for very long inside, and vice versa. So if it's something that's suitable to be in a house, it's unlikely to become an invasive outdoors because it needs to go through the winter-summer cycle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else asked about the list of invasive plants that we should not plant. They're wondering if they could grab a screenshot of that particular slide, but I also just wanted to let the audience know, with your permission, Mike, when we post the seminar on our library resource guide, we can post the slides as well and some supplementary resources and articles and things.
Yeah, absolutely. I could email you the link to it from our website.
Great.
And I'll also provide, like I said, this presentation if people want it for a resource to thumb through at their own pace, or just have it on the side someday for whatever reason. I'll send the link for this presentation too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, if you could send us the link, I could pass it to whoever's interested.
Yeah.
If you want to reach out to us at onehealth@delval.edu, we can absolutely send you the recording and the slides directly. But we will also be posting it at our library guide, which has resources on all of our seminars and slides if presenters provide them. We will post them there on that as well. So the next question we have is Kudzu from the south. Will it ever reach our region?
Yes.
Do you think so? And is it a frightening invasive?
Absolutely. And it's already here.
Oh my.
In New Jersey, there are approximately 36 known populations. Many, if not all of them at this point, were purposely planted or spreading from purposeful plantings, because it is still limited by climate change. It's not quite warm enough. It's warm enough that if you take a plant, put it in the ground, it survives, it could thrive and be 50 feet up a tree. But it hasn't done a great job yet of spreading. And that's why I've been trying. And I just, unfortunately, one of the regrets I have is not being able to secure the funding to get rid of all 36 of those populations in New Jersey before it blows up in our face. Because they do make flowers and they do make viable seeds already in New Jersey. They're not sort of cut off by winter or anything in that way. They're just not spreading fast yet. And literally that could be happening under our nose here and there. We haven't seen it yet. So yeah, Kudzu is been documented as far north as Ontario. So it is a major concern, absolutely. And you know, we have populations here that we should really be eliminating. And I'm sure there are populations in Pennsylvania as well.
Excellent. Well, not excellent, because Kudzu sounds awful.
No, it's horrible.
Excellent answer to your question. So the next question we have is from Brooke, and she's asking, is it okay to pull invasive plants on public lands when you see the invasive, for example, on a walk? Most people know when they see an invasive insect to kill it, but would it be frowned upon to pull out large quantities of plants near trails? Would it cause issues with common people getting mad to see plants pulled out, not knowing the harmful effects of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rule of thumb generally is whoever the landowner is, and whether that's, you know, Pennsylvania State Parks or a Bucks County Park or a Heritage Conservancy Preserve, you know, that you don't do things like that until you talk to the landowners. And like I said, I would say most landowners would be very happy for you to help them with their invasive species problem. And maybe you could be, if you're really interested, you could be that nucleus of a local strike team that leads a long-term effort to combat invasives at a particular site. But as a general rule, you know, reaching out to the landowner is the first step. You know, understand what they're trying to do, understand how you could help them do it.
Great. And this was a question I was going to ask, but Anne got to it first. What is the best strategy to get local government on side about regulating deer populations? Our township manager loves Bambi and is against all efforts to cull.
Yeah, that happens. You know, I think, and I could send you a link for this too. About a couple of years ago, our staff put together what we call the stakeholder slides. And if you want to see how complicated the situation is, I will send you that link as well. But you realize how many players are involved, how many people are going in different directions, and no coordinated effort to go in the same direction towards lowering the deer herd size. And I'm not trying to stir up a ton of water, fuss, but there's folks like your town manager that, doesn't want to shoot Bambi. And, unfortunately, that's to the detriment of all of the things on this slide. Because too much of Bambi means too little of all these guys. And, that's not quite fair either, right? I mean, deer are large, charismatic. We see them, we know them. Probably if you ask someone, is something called a Blackburnian warbler a real thing, or did I just make that name up? Most people would not know the answer, but they know what deer are, and they're fuzzy. So, unfortunately, sort of that love of Bambi is sort of a passive hate of all these other things, to be completely honest with you. On the other hand, you might have, some hunters, again, I have a ton of respect for hunters, but there are a large number of hunters that do not want the herd of the deer size to decrease, because that's what they do for fun. It's recreational hunting. So I've been to meetings where an animal rights activist and a hunter were both against my effort to try to reduce the deer herd. So as they say, politics make strange bedfellows. Deer also make strange bedfellows.
Wow.
Yes, that's what I said. I was very young at the time, and I'm like, did that just happen? But those stakeholder slides, it's a very complicated situation, but and it's the reason why it's not easily solved. But it does kind of give you a hint as to why it's been so challenging for us to really address the deer problem.
Thank you. I have actually one question of my own. What is, in your opinion, one of the best apps per se to identify invasive species? Because just for background, I've got something that looks, I'm pretty sure, like lesser celandine in my front yard.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm finding all these different things online about, oh no, it could be the marsh flower or something like that.
Right.
But I've been seeing these flowers, like you drive by in Percy, or I live, and you see them across the bridge along the water, and it's just full of yellow flowers that I swear should not be there.
Right.
So
right.
how would you advise me and others on the webinar today about how to identify what is an invasive species that they're looking at it?
I have to say, I'm not super duper versed in the apps, but iNaturalist comes up a lot. And the good thing about it is it does plants, it does bugs, it does all kinds of things. And it's basically an AI. You take a picture and it guesses, here's 3 or 4 things that it might be. And then you look up a little closer. Oh yeah, it's definitely that one. And then you guess, right? And then it goes out to the broader community, and there's users on it that check what your guess was. And if you were wrong, that's fine. They'll say, no, I really know about, these plants. That is not marsh marigold. It is indeed lesser celandine. So it has a person or people behind the sort of artificial intelligence of it all. And I find iNaturalist to be a really great one. I know other people have their favorite apps for this or that thing. Some of them focus only on plants. None of these apps are perfect, but my personal preference is iNaturalist. And it's funny because my email is open to the public, so I get seasonal type questions all year round. And this is the season for people to ask me, is that lesser celandine or marsh marigold? So
I bet that's a common question.
oh, this time of year, I get tons of emails for that kind of thing. And people could send me pictures, just informally too, and then I'll try to confirm it. But if it's in your front yard, it's very likely lesser celandine, because marsh marigold would truly be in a marshy, wet place.
Which has nothing to do with anywhere where I live. So it's probably all lesser celandine everywhere.
Very likely, very likely.
Yep. And before we close, we actually do have one last question that just came in. So this is from Tyler, one of our sponsors tonight from Heritage Conservancy. Mike, do you have a recommendation of where we should report new invasive species in Pennsylvania? And he gave an example, IMAP invasives.
Yes, so yeah, in Pennsylvania, IMAP is a way to do it for sure. In New Jersey, we're sort of under the EdMaps, which is a similar type of setup. And our app, our New Jersey app, is really part of EdMaps, but in Pennsylvania, it is IMAP invasive. So yeah, and there are phone apps, I'm sure, for that. I'm sure it's very similar to what I use in New Jersey, but a different system called IMAP. That's great to let people know that that's where you could report things. And you do have a invasive species council in Pennsylvania as well. So if you have concerns about invasive species, you have a group, but fortunately New Jersey does not. It is just little old us as a small nonprofit with part-time staff in New Jersey. We're plucky, but basically people come to us. But in Pennsylvania, there are options with the state, and IMAP invasives is a good way to report things.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. I could not write notes fast enough. So thank you so much. And for everybody on the call, thank you for joining us. And we will definitely be putting all of this on our LibGuide, which I will drop in the thing here. It's library.delval.edu/onehealth. And that is a website that we've been working on to build resources, primers for all of the seminars that we do, including this one and previous ones. So that'll be up in a couple of days, along with the recording of tonight's seminar, the slides that Mike will provide us, and any of the resources that we talked about tonight. I will try to include as well in the resources so you can access all of them.
So thank you, Claire, for hosting tonight. And thank you, Mike, so much for a great presentation. And I, for one, would be very interested in seeing the stakeholder slide for deer control, because I can understand how complicated that gets. And I know that many of our students would love to see just what a mess that is.
Yeah, you can see what I try to point out was the sort of internal within each group, their internal competing priorities. And if you're not really trying to get in a concerted way, work with others to get the deer population down, because you have a little internal conflict in your stakeholder group, that's pretty much why we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine even within state agencies, there's a whole lot of
Sure.
fighting as to whether you should be controlling or not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I'd like to throw in a flag here too for the Pennsylvania Biological Survey. It's not a state agency. It is a group of experts around the state. And this is broken up into technical committees, and there certainly are plant community technical committees, and they too are extremely concerned with invasive species as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Claire, for hosting, and thank all of you for attending this evening.
Thank you.
And thanks to both Tyler and to Diane and to your respective organizations. And I just wanted to point out that Bucks County Audubon Society may have been one of the earliest chapters of Audubon, but it was founded at Del Val too. Good night, everybody.
Right.
Right.
Thanks for having us, Reg.